everyone. So today I'm actually going to be talking about my next novel, the first part of the Shores of Chaos series, Shipwrecked. So unlike the previous novel, Wanderer Among Shadows, this one is not based on a true story, but it is set in the historical past. It is also part horror fiction. Horror is one of my favorite genres, so this is my first foray into that. The novel takes place in 1898 on the coast of Maine in a fictional town called Port de Paix. It centers on a young lighthouse keeper named Edward Ashman and his family. As the summer begins, his daughters Marie and Anna actually find a dead body on the shores, and it turns out that the man is linked to an insurance fraud scheme. Edward and his family get caught up in the insurance fraud scheme when a ship is destroyed one night, and they are caught up in the aftermath. So while they have to deal with criminals on one hand, the supernatural also infiltrates their life. One night, Edward meets a mysterious woman who not only tries to seduce him, but also warns him about dangerous spirits lurking around. In the meantime, his wife Frances, who is suffering from postpartum depression, starts to hear voices who keep harassing her and telling her to do unspeakable things. So the Ashmans must deal with ghosts, murderers, and an ancient curse. So two big inspirations for this story were lighthouses and everything related to the seashore. I love both. So I'm going to give you a brief history of lighthouses and going to the beach. This might have been a better video for summer, but that's a few months away, so here we go. So my first encounter with lighthouses was when I was about 12 years old. We went to the Navissing Twin Lights in the Highlands in New Jersey, and I've just been fascinated since. I've always wanted to write a lighthouse novel, and I actually started writing this story back in college and then finished it a few years later. The novel is set in the 1890s, a time when lighthouse keepers were still very much a necessity. It is also set in Maine. At its peak, Maine had about 80 lighthouses, and the lighthouse in this story is fictional, but it is based off of the many Maine lighthouses that sit atop rocky cliffs. Lighthouses have been around since ancient times, with one of the first examples being the Pharos of Alexandria, which was built in 280 BC. There are still some ancient lighthouses standing. For example, there is one in Dover, England, that was built around 40 AD. So what is a lighthouse's main function? So their main function is actually to guide ships and other mariners to safety out at sea. So they really need to create a strong beam of light that can be seen at night out on the open ocean, so that ships can tell where they are and where they need to go. Various methods have been used over time to create this beam of light, with the first ones being open fires using wood or coal. Candles were then used in the 1500s to the 1700s. Oil lamps then came around, with animal oil as the primary source of fuel. Eventually, kerosene became the main fuel source by 1885. Eventually, electric light started to be used by the 1860s, and electricity is still used to power operating lighthouses to this day. A major improvement to lighthouses came in the 1820s when Augustin Fresnel developed his Fresnel lens, which is basically a lens that is made of concentric circles of glass. These glass lenses help to refract the light to create a strong, far-reaching beam. The lenses could also use a series of flashing beams to let mariners know where they were. And the lenses came in different orders, with the smallest being a 6th order that was about 1.5 feet high, and the largest being a 1st order lens that was about 8.5 feet tall. These lenses would actually rotate with a clockwork mechanism so that they can create the flashing signals that people would see at night. The lighthouses were manned by men and women called lighthouse keepers. Not only did they have to keep the light on, but they also had to maintain the lighthouse station, as well as keep track of weather conditions, any shipwrecks, expenses, things to that nature. The lighthouses were run by the Lighthouse Board, which was under the Treasury Department of the federal government. They were the ones that made the regulations that the keepers had to follow, including how to clean the light and the Navy uniforms that they had to wear. Lighthouse keepers didn't just have to keep the light on, they were also expected to help with shipwrecks and any person that was distressed out at sea. Many keepers also had their family members to assist them, with some becoming keepers in their own right and becoming famous, such as the case with Ida Lewis, who became famous for saving many lives and even received the Gold Life-Saving Medal. Despite the U.S. having over 1,500 lighthouses throughout the centuries, eventually all lighthouses became automated, which ended the need for keepers. So that is lighthouses. Let's move on to some other things revolving around the seashore. So, of course, one of the most famous seaside amusements are the boardwalks. The oldest boardwalk in the United States is actually in Atlantic City. Boardwalks were originally made for more practical purposes, such as keeping sand out of hotels or helping you get to another destination like a bathhouse, but eventually they grew to include things like restaurants, stores, and even amusement parks. One of the first seaside amusement parks that became famous was Coney Island, which actually housed the first roller coaster in the United States. One of the boardwalks I mentioned in my novel is actually the one at Old Orchard Beach in Maine, and that was built in 1898. Amusement park rides actually have their own interesting history. For example, carousels actually originated with a horse riding game from the medieval period. Ferris wheels were actually invented in the 1600s, but they didn't become the big rides that we think of today until George Ferris debuted his at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. The rides now bear his name. Likewise, roller coasters have their origins in the Russian ice slides of the 1600s, but it wasn't until the 1800s that they became the cart and track rides that we love today. Now, most days at the beach would not be complete without ice cream. Ice cream actually has been around since ancient times in one form or another, but it didn't really become the treat that we're used to today until the 1600s. By the 1800s, you can actually go to your local cafe and enjoy the cold treat. These ice cream parlors could be richly decorated and were meant to evoke feelings of being in your own home. They were actually one of the few places that women in the Victorian period could go without a male chaperone and just catch up on some local gossip or even meet a secret lover. So that's just a brief maritime and seaside history for you and just an idea of some of the things that went into the novel. If you want to learn a little bit more about the history behind lighthouses and seaside amusements, check out the links to my blog post below. The link to the first part of my series, Shores of Chaos Shipwrecked, will also be below. It's available in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, and ebook, so please check it out. And until next time, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Hit that like button and subscribe.